Lost is over, but we have to go back down the hatch here on RHAP. We know scripted TV. I'm your host, Josh Wigler, alongside my co-pilot, the great Mike Bloom. Mike, new hatch, same task.
Yes, we wear a bunch of different hats behind the scenes, but it turns out we're wearing a bunch of different hatches as well, which, not to spoil too much about Lost, because we'll get into the purpose of why we are podcasting here, but makes a lot of sense given the course of the series.
Indeed. Folks, for those of you who have never listened to an episode of Down the Hatch, welcome.
Hello.
To those of you who have listened to every episode of Down the Hatch, we're back.
Oh, yeah, baby.
And to all in between, we say hello. It is
to all of you who listened to 3 episodes and said, "What are these two idiots doing? I'm not listening anymore." Well, your worst nightmare has returned.
It has returned as Down the Hatch has come back online for the inevitable Down the Hatch reboot, Mike Bloom. All properties get rebooted. You and I were remarking offline that it's a surprise that Down the Hatch is rebooting before Lost officially reboots.
Now, listen, we've said in our initial incarnation that, like, wouldn't it be fun if the powers that be behind the show that you and I adore were listening to this podcast? In this case, we say, like, if you are listening, do not follow our lead. Do not reboot Lost. No Lost sequel. Let's keep this.
Unless you want Mike and I to write it, in which case, back up the money trucks, baby, because we are ready to sell ourselves out.
Yeah, man, it's a nice lesson of cash the check first before you admit that you have no idea what you're doing when it comes to screenwriting.
That's right. Well, we have an idea of what we're doing here on this podcast at the very least. It is the return of Down the Hatch, which, if you do not know what it was initially conceived of as a Lost rewatch podcast on the late great post-show recaps network. Mike Bloom and I recapped and discussed every single episode of Lost in beat-by-beat, spoiler-filled detail, a podcast designed for folks who had watched every single episode of Lost. It was one of the single greatest creative achievements of, I think, our lives. I'll speak for Mike
absolutely.
as well. A total blast to do. On the other side of talking about Lost, we talked about Lost some more. We talked about Heroes a little bit. We are currently in the middle of watching a totally different show that has some Lost DNA tied to it called Battlestar Galactica. And really the idea on Down the Hatch is Mike and I like to go deep on shows that are in the hatch, that are down the hatch, that are no longer airing, that are in the ether, that are in the archives. And we like to unarchive these shows and really, really examine them. But our DNA begins with Lost. And as we reboot Down the Hatch, now that post-show recaps is over, we are just getting started here on RHAP, our new home for Down the Hatch. And we have some new bells and whistles to tell you about.
Wait, literally in the case of RHAP.
Yes, ding. I don't have a bell. Do you have a bell?
Yeah, hold on.
Go get a bell. I'll filibuster very briefly while Mike goes and gets a bell here. That's all I had to do for the filibustering, I guess. Does he
you want to set up that onomatopoeia again?
No, I don't have the ability to do
it. Just say bells and whistles.
Okay, bells and whistles. Ah, wow, that's a weird bell.
That's like a weak ass bell. Hold on.
Oh, it's like
Asher, like, don't listen to this, Rob. Like, kind of broke it, so we tried to rebuild it to the best of our ability. I'm not a bell mechanic, Josh. Again, I'm not a screenwriter. I'm not a bell mechanic. These are the things I'm slowly figuring out about myself.
Well, we are here to bring some bells and whistles and literal bells to RHAP with Down the Hatch. So here are some things that you need to know about what we are planning here. First and foremost, Down the Hatch in the past was an audio-only podcast. Would you believe that we're on video now as well, Mike Bloom?
I know. I feel like
if you're only listening to the audio version, you don't see me just like tweaking my dimple. I'm just
like,
yeah. Just tweaking my dimple right now, Mike,
special
here on YouTube.
A special video exclusive. If you watch the video, let us know how many fingers I'm holding up right now.
Oh, but that's clever. Okay.
Only the real ones know.
I'm not going to spoil how many fingers Mike Bloom is holding up. And typically that's a dangerous question to ask. But here's the plan. We are going to be on YouTube. There's going to be video versions here of Down the Hatch on the RHAP We Know Scripted TV YouTube feed. So check us out. Search for RHAP. We Know Scripted TV. You will find us on YouTube that way. We are also going to be available in the We Know Scripted TV RHAP podcast feed is going to be a secondary home for Down the Hatch. Rob has a website.com/scripted, has all of the information about how to subscribe to the scripted feed. You'll get a ton of great shows that are part of the RHAP scripted brand, including The Tastemakers, which is Taryn Armstrong and Grace Leader, talking about various TV shows, giving their critical takes each and every week. There's the weekend program with myself and the great Antonio Mazzaro. It's a Saturday morning TV show hangout spot where we talk about all manner of topics from the TV and media realm. And of course, Mike Bloom co-hosting the incredible TV for Real, a party show where Mike and Sasha are talking about various different TV topics with reality stars each and every week. I love TV for Real, Mike.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we actually did a Lost episode as well. I got on the line with Corey Wertenberger, star of Big Brother 25, a few weeks back to talk about his love of the show. Of course, Corey is a hatchling, was a hatchling prior to his time of becoming a reality star. That is full of spoilers. So again, if you are just chancing upon this podcast and you've never seen Lost before, do not watch it unless you intend to be spoiled about the entirety of Lost, basically. But that was a really fun time. And again, encapsulates some of the stuff we've been talking about on DTH into other podcasts proper.
Yes. So there's a reason why Mike is cautioning you if you are somebody who has not seen Lost before. Traditionally, we have told these people, because we've had the outreach before in the past, Mike.
Very much so, yeah.
Of like, oh, Josh and Mike, you podcast about Lost. I'm interested in Lost. I'm watching it for the first time. Can I listen to your podcast? And we go, no. Don't push the button. The button's bad. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Because suffice it to say, Lost, and we'll certainly talk about its impact on the pop culture landscape, but is a show that is full of twists, turns, mysteries, questions, answers. And you and I, from pretty much the beginning, encapsulated a lot of talk about future storylines, characters, moments, and ultimate answers into the talk of the podcast. And so it is an absolute no-go for anyone who did not want to be spoiled about Lost.
It was an absolute no-go for anybody who didn't want to be spoiled on Lost, because as we are rebooting Down the Hatch for RHAP, We Know Scripted TV, we are going back to our roots. We have to go back to our roots, Mike Bloom. We are currently in the middle of Battlestar Galactica. We have paused down in between, really at the halfway point. At the end of season 2, we have finished
really nicely.
We have finished seasons 1. We finished the miniseries, season 1, season 2. Those are spoiler-free podcasts. I've seen the show. Mike has never seen the show. If you're ever interested in watching Battlestar Galactica, I believe it is streaming on Prime Video at this moment in time.
One of the many things that has happened since the time that we went on break, which happened for a number of reasons, between, of course, the shutdown and post-show recaps and the resurgence of scripted content here on RHAP. Josh and I both had some respective business that we needed to take care of as well offline. And then we were looking for an opportunity to come back on and say, okay, we were always going to return. Josh and I, frankly, love this too damn much to ever leave a project like this behind. And so we had been talking about, okay, when do we want to bring back DTH? It's inevitable that it's going to be BSG. But then, Josh, little streaming service by the name of Netflix happened to put out the entirety of the series of Lost on July 1st.
So Lost is also now streaming in its entirety on a streaming service. As Mike mentions, it's on Netflix. It's been on Netflix as of July 1st. And this podcast coming out on 8/15, a very specific number.
I do feel like the first, again, we can't get into too many inside jokes. I feel like those first 2 words, I was about to respond with something and I couldn't.
Be careful. 8/15, August 15th, as this podcast is being released. We are we're going back to Lost. We are interrupting your Battlestar Galactica programming for a little while longer for what we hope is going to be a really fun mini series devoted to Lost. Mike Bloom and I think we do not have the ability to go back to every single episode of Lost and recap the entirety of the show without getting divorced by our wives. Is that correct, Mike?
That is incredibly accurate. Any funds that are going to RHAP would absolutely support Josh and Mai's alimony fund
Yes.
for the fact that, yes, our significant others.
They would leave us.
I talk about this all the time, but like my beautiful wife, who watched Wallace alongside me, now just has such a feeling attached to the show because of what Down the Hatch has become. And we should also say, Josh, not to put the cart before the horse 10 minutes in, happy 5-year anniversary, my friend.
Happy 5-year anniversary. Yes, Down the Hatch launched 5 years ago. Can you believe that?
I mean, we were in a very different space, and that's why, again, once you've watched Lost all the way through and you want to go back and listen to that back catalog,
then you go back. Yeah.
We say Lost meets you where you are, and there was certainly a very fun time to sort of track our own respective moods in response to the show at the time, the world at the time. But yeah, suffice it to say, we're not going to be nearly as comprehensive. It was an absolute labor of love, but Josh and I would go usually on a weekly basis, at least 2 hours
at least
an episode.
Yes. We really went in depth on every single episode of the show. And when you watch, not if you watch, but when you watch all of Lost, you're going to have a really fun rewatch companion piece at your disposal. But the one thing that we've never been able to offer people, for the people who have asked, is, are your podcasts spoiler free? And well, they're about to be. Because here's what Mike Bloom and I are going to do. While we wait to return to Battlestar Galactica, you'll have to wait just a couple more months for us to turn the key back on BSG.
But it's coming. It's coming back.
It is coming back. We have to go back to Lost at the start. Post-show recaps began with Lost coverage within its first year. It is only fitting. It's a good luck charm, Mike, that RHAP, We Know Scripted TV, begins with a Lost project as well. So here's the plan. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, Mike Bloom and I shall provide you with spoiler-free recaps of all 6 seasons of Lost. We're going to do spoiler-free recaps season by season, 1 podcast per season, 1 podcast per week. That means 1 season per week. This is designed for the people listening to it in the real time, for you to binge Lost, stop down between seasons, listen to us explain what you just watched. So the season 1 podcast will drop next week, and it will assume that you have watched all of season 1, but no further. That's all you will have need to seen. The next week, it'll be a season 2 podcast where we will go through the entirety of season 2, try to talk about and explain to you what you have just seen and help you process that as well. So on and so forth through the final season of Lost. It's 6 full seasons, spoiler-free recaps over the course of the next 6 weeks, not only to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of Down the Hatch, Mike, and not only to mark the launch of RHAP's new scripted TV podcast feed, or like relatively new at this point, like newish.
I think it's still, you know, in its toddler days, I would say. We've gotten walking a little bit.
It's walking. We're walking. We're walking here. But also, Lost itself turns 20 this year. On September 22nd, 2024. It's 20 years of Lost. So this whole year has been a 20th anniversary celebration. We got to get in on the fun here, Mike.
Yeah, it really is like having a birthday around Christmas. And for some people, that unfortunately means half as many gifts as you might think. For us, it's twice as many. It really is just a perfect syzygy of events to have us go back and talk about Lost, but still in a new way. You know, I think it had certainly been talked about at the time and definitely in retrospect as to like, okay, when Josh and I cover Lost again, would there be a different angle? Because I think while Lost does have you vibing with different aspects depending at the point you're at in your life, there's very little utility to just going back and doing the exact same thing we did before. Yeah. And this was a large factor of the fandom that we left untouched, which was this idea of going through from a spoiler-free perspective. Because again, both of us have seen the show a fair number of times, to put it mildly. And so it was obviously something that we didn't necessarily want to play dumb about, just to sort of have people, you know, go along in the dark. I will also say
it wasn't interesting to us, is what we kept saying in those early days. It's like, we've seen the show, we want to talk about the whole show. And now, ironically, Mike, having done that, now it's really interesting to me to be like, Can we talk about Lost for the people who haven't seen it? And can we provide them with some wisdom? And I hope that we can in this like truncated way.
Now, all that being said, so the way we're going to do each of these podcasts is, again, it's going to be one podcast about a season. And we're going to go episode by episode, obviously not as in depth as we did in the past, but certainly going through the events that happened over the course of each
Charting
season.
the arc, right?
So that being said, to Josh's point, I would imagine for all of you newbies out there, watch all of season 1 first, unless you really want to like work out your pause button and pause down after every single episode that we talk about. Feel free to do that. But like you said, we're not pursuing any further after that season for that week. So your homework basically for the 7 days in between DTH episodes is to go to Netflix, watch that season of Lost. It does get a little bit easier as the seasons go along. The episode orders go from a bit more of a conventional number at
like
the time.
20, 22, and then down to like 12, and then up to 17.
Yeah, we get a writer's strike in the middle of that. Everything old is new again. So, yeah, I mean, that's been really interesting as well, Josh, is that with Lost sort of coming back to the forefront in Netflix, there has been an interesting amount of coverage from, media outlets, including stuff like these are the episodes of Lost that you could skip. And again, it's so interesting to look at it from a modern television perspective. And look, if people need an opportunity to go back for those that are missing those days of the quote unquote filler episodes and dealing with shows that don't have 8 episode orders that are an hour and a half each and equate to the length of like a 6-hour movie, Lost is right there, but still has a lot of high quality to it, especially for the time it premiered it.
For sure. So we're really excited. I think Mike and I would both agree that no episode of Lost is skippable. Even the worst episodes of Lost have something to enjoy in them. Though maybe the worst episode of Lost, according to Mike Bloom and I, who did full rankings of every single episode, we'll talk about that as we go along. Like, I think we can out the worst episode when we're like, that's the worst episode of Lost according to us. That one maybe I do tend to skip on every single rewatch, I have to say.
Well, that's the other thing as well, is that we can certainly talk about the appeal of Lost. One of the major ones, especially from like a persistence perspective and why it lingers so much in the minds of fans, is this ensemble of very complicated characters. And even in some of those quote unquote filler episodes, especially in retrospect, there are moments from these characters that can sometimes either incidentally or purposely get paid forward in future seasons, future episodes.
Yeah, so even things that don't feel like they're totally relevant or like, why did I watch that, usually will have some measure of utility, more often than not. So we're going to talk about that stuff too, I think, as we go through these episodes. We'll try and provide context,
when we'll be the Lost historians.
When there's like behind the scenes context that feels really relevant to bring to the discussion, we will do that as well. And we will do it in a way that doesn't spoil where we're going. We are going to keep it locked in to the episodes that we're talking about and the seasons that we're talking about and no further. So if you are one of those people who was interested in watching Lost, you've never watched it, and now you kind of want to watch it, but you need a podcast companion, here's your assignment. Let's crush Lost together over the course of the next 6 to 7 weeks and come back, check out Down the Hatch in between seasons every single week. And Mike and I will guide you through it. And when we're done, we'll probably do one final wrap up of what did we learn here on Lost? We'll answer listener questions along the way. Maybe a special guest or two could be fun, Mike, at the end of this thing. But then we will we will resume our project, which is Battlestar Galactica, which is another incredible show that I have seen. Mike has never seen. So those podcasts are also spoiler free. So if you are really vibing with Down the Hatch and you're going to want to continue past the Lost, we recommend you go and watch the miniseries and the first 2 seasons of Battlestar Galactica, then pause down and wait for us. In October, we will be back with our BSG coverage. Between now and then, we're back to the island. Mike, I have a question for you.
Oh, please.
What do you think people think about Lost when they've never seen it before? Like if someone's like, okay, Lost, I've heard the name and this is what I know about it. What do you think the answer to this is what I know about it tends to be?
Honestly, the number one answer on the Family Feud board, in my opinion, is polar bears on an island. I think, look, you and
Yeah.
I, one of the reasons why we became so close is because of our mutual love of the show Survivor. I feel
Oh,
like
which we can now, by the way, if you're just a down the hatch person, we're on RHAP. And if you don't know what RHAP stands for, it's Rob Has a Podcast, and the RHAP network covers reality TV first and foremost. But we also know scripted TV, which is why Down the Hatch lives here now. But we used to feel bad about sometimes doing reality TV references in the podcast because that's not specifically what we were here to be. But we're part of the reality TV podcast network now.
Yeah.
So expect some Survivor shouts.
expect several of them, maybe.
Expect the unexpected.
Yeah,
Mike.
and we hope to win 1 million hearts in the process.
Oh,
Josh gets all these references now.
I do.
I'm so happy.
Yes, that's right.
But I think much like Survivor is sometimes remembered by people outside of the knowledgeable sphere as, oh, that's the show where people eat bugs.
Yes.
Lost is remembered for the polar bears on the island. And that, again, I'm not going to spoil too much. It is a big WTF moment in the early part of the show when it was at its most popular that I think a lot of people remember that does serve perhaps more than bug eating as kind of a representation of some of the more WTF moments in the show's history.
When it was initially conceived by the powers that be, Lloyd Braun at ABC, I believe it's J.J. Abrams, of course, Damon Lindelof, who would go on to be one of the two showrunners of Lost. And is it Jeffrey Lieber, I believe?
Yes.
Is the third, is like the fifth Beatle of
Pete Best.
Yeah, is the Pete Best of Lost. It's sort of the assignment was, we want a show that is going to be Survivor meets Gilligan's Island. That was like the elevator pitch when Lost was initially conceived. Did that assignment get fulfilled by Lost, do you think, Mike? Is Lost more polar bears on islands or more Survivor meets Gilligan's Island?
It's interesting because I would say that the way it is remembered is polar bears on islands. And this is going to be really interesting, again, coming in from a first watch perspective, is that, again, this show is about a lot of things kind of being thrown at viewers in terms of character mysteries, island mysteries, etc., and people trying to figure out exactly what the answers to these mysteries are. One thing I would really encourage people to do is, like, we're in the middle of the jungle, but don't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
There is a beautiful tapestry of characters that exist that have the mysteries around them, and you will get a lot of enjoyment out of just observing these people as well. And yes, the mysteries are so much fun to speculate over, but don't forget about the people that these mysteries are happening to as well. And so I would say that the show is remembered for those mystery aspects. Again, as we talk about the cultural landscape that Lost set up, it really was. Now, the X-Files, I think, was a big example of like a mystery of the week show kind of going mainstream, but this felt entirely different. This was a big mystery box show that had inspired countless ripoffs, even other acclaimed shows like a Westworld as an example of, okay, we're going to present grand scale mysteries and mythos over the course of an entire season or an entire series. But I would say that if you take a little bit more of a look into the DNA of the show, the Survivor element sort of, we'll talk about, I think, our respective origins with the show. One of the reasons why I was hooked in was because of that pitch, that it was sort of advertised as, oh, this is like a scripted version of Survivor, and perhaps incorrectly advertising that like someone would get eliminated at the end of every episode. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen.
Tons of blind sides, many twists, even like idol adjacents, I think. Yeah.
Definitely a lot of advantages and random things that show up in the middle of the jungle that could help or hurt people. A lot of beware advantages happening over the course of this. But suffice it to say, the elimination aspect is not necessarily there, or even a social strategy aspect. Josh and I used to make jokes all the time on Down the Hatch about like, oh, who would be the best Survivor player, comparing it to Survivor situations. But it's much more encompassing this idea of Gilligan's Island, that there will be attempts to leave the island, certainly, especially in these early days. There'll be a lot of talk about basic tenets of survival, but it's all about this group of people and the chemistry that's created therein, the friendships, the enemies, etc.
Like the best reality shows, I do think. Like, I do think like that's one thing that like the Survivor comparisons absolutely get right, where like I think So having been a super duper fan of Survivor and now entering my super duper casual era, which is, really where I've lived for about 5 years now, I feel like I have been able to like step away from like when I was really in the Survivor weeds, I would be like so mad at game design. I'd get
Mm.
so mad about twists. The Edge of Extinction literally drove me insane.
To the
You
edge
know,
of extinction.
drove me to the edge of extinction. And in reassessing the things that I cared about with that show and the things that I'm enjoying as I'm, rediscovering the seasons that or discovering the seasons that I missed because I stopped watching Survivor for a while. It is, as always, it's the people, like the people, the cast makes
Mhm.
the show. Like your premise is pretty locked and golden. People are stranded on an island vying for a form of survival. There's twists, there's beware advantages, there's mergatories, there's all these things that are thrown in that are sometimes really great and clever and other times really ridiculous and not so good. And why did you ever conceive of something like that? And I think Lost is kind of similar
Mhm.
in some of those ways. There's going to be twists along the way in Lost that are bad outright for sure, that Mike and I will have fondness for because this is our baby. But I
Yeah.
think that we can admit like, that's not so good. A lot of the twists are awesome though. I should say that like the game design of Lost in many ways is spectacular. But the thing that it most has in common with these great reality shows that the people of RHAP typically flock to is wink, is that we love the people. We love
That's
the
yeah.
cast.
And that's really what it is as well. And it's almost comparable to a show like Big Brother, where it's going to be a much longer game. You're talking about 100+ episodes, and your opinions are going to change on these characters. These people arrive to the island in a very different state than whenever we last see them
Yeah.
on the show. And either that is through actions that they do or things that they encounter over their time on the island, or it's us getting to know them a bit better through flashbacks as well, which is a big advent and certainly, again, grew a big convention for a lot of shows that would follow. Is that oftentimes, especially in these early seasons, we'll get two timelines where we're going to get all the action going on in the island in the present day. And then when you hear those little timpani drums, that's a
Mhm.
cue that we're going to go back to a centric character's flashback over a particular portion of time that should ideally tell us a little bit more about who they came with, where they came from, and
Yeah.
how that informs who they are right now.
Yeah, and who they could be leaving with
Mhm.
as the story progresses. So there's a lot of that. I think like the flashback structure, like in the way that like there's a challenge in every episode of Survivor. There's some sort of flashback, something or other in every
Mhm.
single episode of Lost.
Yeah, no, Survivor New Era controversially used flashbacks, and
Oh, so I've seen.
yeah,
Yes.
they got rid of them a little bit.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Mix it up. Why not? I think like so. There's no tribal council, at the end of every
Yeah,
episode of
but
Lost.
what I would say is that Lost is most memorable for how its episodes end.
Yes.
Much like every episode of Survivor typically ends with elimination by a tribal council, Lost, while again will not eliminate a person every episode, will often end on a big cliffhanger, which again felt fairly unfounded at the time, especially in the realm of scripted television. That was the thing about Lost and why it really went over like gangbusters, particularly in the first season, was that something to this scope had not been done before. I know that, again, we're assigning homeworks to go watch season one, but I really encourage, after people watch the two-part pilot specifically, go watch the making of the pilot. It's a
Mm.
featurette. It's available online because just the pure spectacle of what they had to do and bringing in somebody like J.J. Abrams, who we should also say, to clear the air a little bit, because there's been a bit of a Mandela effect, what's not behind the vast majority of decisions behind Lost?
Directed the pilot, was an executive producer on Lost, but is majorly uninvolved beyond that.
Yeah,
Gets Lost off the ground, and then it falls to a squadron of people, directors, writers. Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse are the showrunners and often given the most credit for the story, but it really is an effort from so many different people, the actors who bring these
yeah.
characters to life as well.
Yeah, but I would say that so no matter what your feelings on J.J. Abrams might be, right? And he certainly has some thoughts upon him, particularly when it comes to his somehow returning to the Star Wars franchise
Yeah.
towards the end of the Skywalker saga. He has a big part in getting that plane off the ground, but then sort of leaves after. And even though we see the bad robot title card at the end of every episode, it's not necessarily him. He certainly was an inspiration, I think, for Damon and Carlton, but wasn't necessarily having a direct involvement in it. But that pilot directed by him is so massive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's just something that, again, I can't really remember at the time there being such a huge thing to start a show with, that this was something that they actually kick off an entire series with. And there's a lot of talks about like the pilot of Lost, how they had filmed this, obviously without knowing whether it'd be ordered to series, and how it just like absolutely won so many people over because for many reasons it was an entirely different beast than anything we had seen on television.
I think that like you say, there's the cliffhangers, but sometimes there's like, just like sort of like somber emotional notes that the episodes will end on. But by and large, the episodes are sort of designed in like, it was a weekly TV show that felt like it was built for a binge era, where it'd be so hard not to just click next episode if that was available to you. And like when Lost was airing, I think it captured a lot of fans through DVD box sets. Do you know what a DVD is? Oh my gosh.
Should I bring out another prop?
I'm so old. I'm the only one who remembers what a DVD box set is. Mike Bloom currently holding the entire complete series of Lost here.
Oh my God. I feel like I could do like curls with these. This is a chonker.
This is a really great addition to Down the Hatch as the video podcast component, because now we've unlocked Gallagher prop comedy.
Well, I'm not going to smash this thing. It's going to cost a considerable amount of money, especially when I ordered it for like my 21st birthday back when the series finale aired.
All right. Well, we can find some other things to smash along the way here on Down the Hatch. But I think like sort of in the same way that like tribal councils will leave you shocked or sad or like relieved, or like, okay, that was kind of like every episode of Survivor is always designed to leave you with a very specific emotion that in that case is triggered by an event that happens just about every single week, barring a few exceptions in like medevacs and things like that. Lost, the mechanisms are going to change quite often, except for one that I would argue is sort of like the show's tribe has spoken, is like every episode of Lost will end with a title card, the white font Lost on a black background. And sometimes it'll be soft where it'll be like the music has played you out and there's a black background and the white Lost comes up. But also often there will be the crazy score from the composer, Michael Giacchino. Michael Giacchino, who is also just an instrumental, no pun intended, part of Lost, where it will like, there will be like twisty vibes are starting to happen, like
or just like I can't walk through the woods anymore with hearing so that's the thing.
And then it'll go Lost, and so there'll always be like some sort of pow right in the kisser that happens at most of the end of all of these episodes. I feel like that's a little bit close to the vote out.
And I also will say, certainly there's been a lot of discourse, even from a Survivor perspective, as to like, do theme songs exist anymore? Do opening credits, are they a thing in our modern day setting? Lost has one of the most memorable where technically it's a theme song, Josh, but it's more so just like a soundscape, kind of, where after the first act, which typically is not a huge cliffhanger, but like a little bit of a, oh, we're in it now. You'll hear like discordant mechanical noises, like somebody left the slide on the trombone and a noise ended up emitting from it, as we see like a skewed version of the letters LOST slowly come into view and become more clear in the moment, which represents hopefully what the viewers' opinions are, which are like, hey, even in an episode, we're kind of usually getting dropped in the middle of nowhere and having to left kind of scramble and pick our jaw off the ground and be like, okay, where are we now? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And we have to move on from there.
Well, another, I think, great reason why. Okay, so like it's a plane crashes, a bunch of people are lost on a remote island, and they have to figure out what to do now. That's the basic premise of the show. But the other reason that it's great that it's called Lost is because often that's where you, the viewer, are watching the show. And sometimes it's not like you're lost for the right reasons, but often you are. You're like being dragged by the nose to a new corner of the universe of the show. There's some new piece of information about the characters that drop that unlocks another piece of information about another character. So like from week to week, you're a little bit lost yourself, and you're, you know, the other promise of the word lost is found, right? So like you're finding out the information as you go from episode to episode and week to week. And it really was the kind of show that when it originally aired, you know, podcasts were not a huge thing.
Nope.
The after show was not a huge thing in, you know, pop culture. And Lost really, in many ways, started to change that, whether it was like the EW articles written by Doc Jensen or your friends and mine, Jay and Jack, who are some of the pioneers of the Lost podcast.
Hell,
space.
Damon and Carlton themselves did Lost podcasts.
There was
an
official Lost podcast. Jeff Probst, Trial by Fire, Eat Your Heart Out. What is that called?
On Fire with Jeff Probst.
On Fire with Jeff Probst. Trial by Fire, I think, is a totally different thing. But I feel like even Rob, you know, the great Rob Sesternino and Nicole podcasted about the final season of Lost in the earliest days of RHAP. So truly, Lost coming in at the start of an RHAP era, it is a good luck charm. This is a show that really invites that level of attention seeking and like trying to figure out all the granular details and unpack and understand all of that stuff, which is why I certainly have understood as people have discovered Lost in the subsequent years, why they would want some sort of like spoiler-free companion podcast. My old answer used to be like, there's tons of great podcasts that existed at the time of the run that you should go and seek out. And even like some of Down the Hatch's contemporaries, like The Storm, which is, I believe, from that crew is what Trial by Fire comes from, or Trial by Combat, I think. And so like they did spoiler-free sections before they did their spoiler-filled. So there was always like great places to go. My modern answer now, Mike, is check out the Down the Hatch reboot, because we're going to give you a spoiler-free mini-series covering all of Lost, where we will do our best to be comprehensive. But I do think to some extent, this will be Lost Cliff Notes, where we'll guide you through what's going on and explain to you what we believe are the important things that you need to check out from season to season. But then you're going to become a Lost addict, and you're going to want to go back and rewatch the whole show. And if not rewatch the show, re-listen to the show. And
we go pretty comprehensively into every single thing that happened in the show, including playing clips from the episodes.
Every single scene. So you'll want to, at that point, like go all the way back down the hatch to the start of the Down the Hatch podcast feed. But in the meantime, we are here for you as you discover the show. And I think also this should be a really fun journey for people who've watched the show a million times, because Mike and I will do our best to like bake in little Easter eggs here and there. But also maybe you will just enjoy checking us out, talking about Lost again.
Hope you remove the shells from the Easter eggs before you bake them in.
Typically.
Well, let me ask you, Josh. What is your Lost origin story? How did you get into the show? When did you get into the show? And what made you such, I imagine, an early captivated fan of it, to the point that we're going back for the umpteenth time this time around?
Sure. For those who do not know me at all, let's start there. I don't know. I
feel like that was a lyric, but I don't think it was.
For those who do not know me at all, hi, I'm Josh Wigler. I've been on the RHAP network for over a decade now. I am so old, and my first love is Survivor. I came to it through Survivor. Was a huge Survivor nut. Australian Outback season 2, my first season. Used to say favorite season, and then like I don't really feel that way anymore. And so I was obsessed with Survivor, and my friends like didn't really keep up with it, and so it became kind of like a show that was like either on my own, or I would like find people online to talk about it with and engage with about it. But Survivor kind of unlocked in me like TV being sort of a weekly destination for me. I'd previously been super into movies primarily, and then TV became my jam. And then I was in college, I'd been like a 24 guy, a couple of these other shows. Alias, I loved. And I paid attention to like all of like the online entertainment sites. I am an entertainment journalist by trade and work online primarily, and I come by that very honestly. I used to read Ain't It Cool, Dark Horizons, like all these different sites when I was coming up, and I remember it was Herc at Ain't It Cool that was hyping up Lost. This show is coming. There's a polar bear. It's crazy, and it was very much on my radar as a thing to watch. The problem was it was on Wednesday nights at the same time that I was a sophomore in college and I had astronomy lab. And so I missed the first episode, the first half of the 2-part pilot. It aired across 2 different weeks. And I read the reviews and people were like, oh my God, what's going on? And I was like, that's it. I'm skipping class. So I decided not to go to my astronomy lab the next Wednesday night. I watched the second part of the pilot of Lost and was like, beyond hooked, absolutely out of my mind hooked. So I don't recommend this to people that you choose a TV show over your education, but that's what I did. And I guess it long-term benefited me quite well, Mike. I never missed an episode from that point on. It became a religious experience between me and my college roommates and my friends from school. Once we graduated, we really kept in touch because of Lost. I would find new people who were into Lost, not unlike the show, like the characters and the cast, it expands. That was kind of like my experience was mimicking life. And by the end of the show, by the 6th season, I was now in entertainment journalism and I got to interview many of the people involved for that final season. I wrote recaps for MTV News. And so it was like this really surreal experience for me where Lost became this incredibly important piece of my life, personally and professionally. And it's my sincerest hope, Mike, that until my dying day, one of my primary purposes on earth will be to be preaching the gospel of my favorite show, because Lost is absolutely that. So that's my origin story, Mike. I know yours is a bit different.
Yeah, mine is a little bit different. So my name is Mike Bloom. I've been part of this network for about 10 years as well. So I'm joining you on that old beach as well, Josh.
So old.
Which does
so
have
old.
I will spoil, it does have a Lost connection as well with the old beach. But you'll have to find that out later, newbies. So I am somebody who Lost premiered when I was 14 years old. Actually, I just turned 15 years old. It was the month afterwards. And I was someone who, if you haven't gleaned this from 45 minutes of listening to me, was someone who grew up with a lot of anxiety, depression, ideations, to the point where I was somebody where I didn't check out a lot of drama on television. For me, it was all about like, I want to live in a world where at the end of every episode, things are relatively back to normal and we have some laughs and then we move on. Hell, even a show like Seinfeld, despite me being so comedy oriented, was in a really tough space for me. What had me dip my toes in the water a little bit was reality television. And so I got in, as a lot of people did, through Survivor. I've watched since the 6th episode of the first season, have not missed a beat since, and have been able to work the beat as a member of the Survivor press ever since. Amazing Race, Big Brother, etc. And so, as mentioned before, I was brought onto Lost by this idea of, okay, I know you typically don't like scripted drama, Sopranos, bleh, NYPD Blue, what the hell is that? But here's a show that might be a scripted version of Survivor. And I said, say less. Let me check it out. The first episode that I ended up watching was actually episode 5 of season 1, but there was so much acclaim at the time through those first 4 episodes, because the pilot aired in 2 parts, that I thought, okay, let me check this out. It's something I talk about on Down the Hatch all the time. I used to watch episodes on a weekly basis with my mom. She would be the person in the room where we could talk about what the hell is going on in the moment. And I was just hooked immediately, between the mystery box aspect of just presenting these WTF elements and having people try to think their way backwards or into all these logical loopholes as to, okay, how can this be true if this can also be true? Whether it was getting to know these characters, which again, probably landed on the island, identifying as a bunch of different tropes that you might expect from a piece of pop culture, but then really ending up becoming something else entirely, almost for better or for worse. And so it was a show that not only got me so invested in it, but in the medium of scripted television in general. And I'm so lucky that I have the ability to also work in entertainment reporting, that I've been able to podcast about television and movies on and off and get access to so many beautiful pieces of art through a show like Lost, which also gave me one of my favorite views of storytelling as well, which is the ensemble
Yeah.
of it all. That as much as we like titular characters, as much as we like that it's Walter White and the world around him,
Tony
I re-
Soprano.
yeah, and maybe again it's the reality TV aspect, but I like the idea that this truly was a cast of people from all different walks of life stranded on an island together. And sometimes there'll be people at the forefront, but then at other points we'll go on to other random characters.
Yeah,
for the
there's
stories.
definitely like a worthy argument to being like the editing's unbalanced. Like what?
Yeah,
Like,
there are some purple edits happening.
you're not showing enough of that guy. You're showing too much of this one. Like I hear it, and I think it's
Yeah,
yeah.
But then
But
when
there's a
that
different
happens,
person for everybody, right? Like
Yeah.
like different boats are going to be floating.
and eventually what we'll get sometimes is we will get like Natalie Bolton in Micronesia, where it's like, oh, this person pops out of nowhere, and oh my god, all of a sudden they have all this stuff to them. That happens with one very particular character in season 1 that I'm very excited to discuss. And that's the other thing as well, is that with the long-term storytelling of it, you get to follow characters on these journeys. And unlike a show like Survivor, where it's pretty much, okay, we're there for 13, 14 episodes, and then these people leave, and the majority of them we don't really talk about again unless we're super duper nerds online. And then we bring in a whole new group. Again, not to spoil the show too much, but you know, the people who land on this island will not be the only people we see throughout the entirety of the series. And getting to bring in all of these other characters and find out a bit more about them not only brings some fresh blood into things, but allows us to explore even more of these dynamics as they become deliciously complicated.
So we're going to start digging into all of that as soon as next week. We're going to be charting the entirety of season 1 of Lost. So your assignment between now and the next episode of Down the Hatch is binge season 1 of Lost. And if you can't listen to us in the real time, that's fine. We'll be here. We'll be here waiting for you. So binge us at your leisure. But the next podcast, we'll be talking about the entirety of season 1. It'll probably be like a 700-hour podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot to talk about, Josh. It's the biggest season. It is 25 episodes.
25 episodes of Lost. We're going to have to introduce all these characters, set them up along the way, but I think we'll be able to do that with the episodes will sort of guide us in a really great way of being able to get all of that down. And I'm so excited about it. I'm really excited to revisit a bunch of my favorite characters in fiction, my favorite show of all time, to do it in this way that is inclusive to people who haven't experienced it before. And just to get us all back on the same page. Down the Hatch is a really fun, very wild, weird, specific podcast as well. We are opening our arms to we call our listeners the hatchlings.
We do.
And we have it's open enrollment season for new hatchlings. So we're excited to invite you along for the ride. If you want to be subscribed only to the Down the Hatch podcast feed, Rob has a website.com/DTH. We'll do it. Rob has a website.com/DTH, though we encourage you to subscribe to all things RHAP We Know Scripted TV. Rob has a website.com/scripted. We'll get you all of that information. Rob has a website.com/scripted for the YouTube information as well. Watch these video versions of the podcast. Very fun to literally, like, we just did not do that for the original run of Down the Hatch. So if you're going to be into this and you're like, well, I want to watch the video versions of the spoiler podcast, you have to subscribe to the podcast feed. There are no videos.
Yeah,
We didn't record them.
You just have to imagine what Josh and I might look like as we talked for sometimes many, many hours.
Many
about a show
hours
that we enjoyed.
Our final podcast on the final episode of Lost was 8 hours, right? Something like that.
A third of a day. Yep.
Yeah. So we're not going to go that long here. Again, this is more like, let's talk about the show, and then you can go and you can finish the whole thing. And now you're obsessed. Go back and listen to the granular stuff. But this will be a really fun way to re-experience it all. Email as well if you want to get in touch with us. New email address, because the old one really didn't latch on, Mike. Down the Hatch RHAP at gmail.com. Down the Hatch RHAP at gmail.com. Down the Hatch RHAP at gmail.com. Send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Questions that you've got. We will probably save the questions for the very end of the run, but they will inform our analysis and telling you what seems to be, if there's things that are trending among all of you of like, what's up with that? We'll try and incorporate that, but I think we'll save a lot of these questions until the end of the run, which is going to be end of September, start of October. Some shout outs, of course. These podcasts down the hatch, not possible, of course, without the great Jess Sterling, who is editing these podcasts. Our longtime producers, Ben Martell, the Ben behind the curtain, and the great Brendan Fitzpatrick, without whom Down the Hatch would not exist. Those two guys have been relieved of Lost duty for this current project and have been told, get to work on Battlestar Galactica Season 3, because when we are done with Lost, Mike and I are going to be podcasting about Battlestar Galactica again. We'll reset the stage for everybody who wants to come along for the ride for the first time.
And maybe those of us that haven't watched or thought of Battlestar Galactica in probably 6 months at that point.
Mike is going to have to rewatch the miniseries in the first 2 seasons of BSG to get back on board. But you should do that as well. If you've never watched Battlestar Galactica, a side project for you out there, watch the show, because
it's been a lot of fun so far. As someone who did not watch it, and again, if you are into these big twisty shows that are full of complicated characters and have you continually questioning the nature of reality, absolutely check out Battlestar Galactica. That was a very different type of podcast as well, because again, I haven't seen it before, so I'm doing a lot of what these other Lost podcasts that we were talking about were doing in the moment, which is just me thinking out loud about a bunch of stupid suppositions that I have, and Josh getting to bring in a bit of the dose of reality, some historical context as well. But very much recommend, like, if you cannot get enough of the stuff that Lost is on right now, Battlestar Galactica, which was airing around the same time as, the heyday of Lost, is a great way to go to.
Yes. So you've got another show that you can watch while you are binging Lost. And if you enjoy Down the Hatch on the other side of Lost, the spoiler-free BSG project, there's tons of podcasts already available to you, and it's going to continue once we are done with Lost. So make sure to follow along with everything. Again, robhasawebsite.com/scripted or robhasawebsite.com/DTH. Send us an email, downthehatch@gmail.com. We're on the social medias. I'm at Round Howard. He's at a Mike Bloom type. Mike, are you ready to go back?
I really am.
Do you want to just say some names? Like Jack, Hurley, Locke.
Oh, Sawyer.
Rousseau.
Arst.
Just like random things that aren't going to make sense to any of you until you hit play, but you're going to know all the stuff, and it's going to be really, really fun with season 1. I can't wait to dive back into season 1. Classic era. This is Coca-Cola Classic Lost is what we're all about to get into.
Yeah, this is a season that will win the Emmy for Best Drama Series. This is one that really put the show on the map, and again, made it such a big thing that is going to spawn and inspire all these other shows that come after it. I mean, it really has the thankless job of introducing us to a cast of, nearly 20, telling us all their stories, while also introducing all this old and new stuff from the island, and it does it with aplomb. So I'm so excited to talk about it, Josh, to look at season 1 all over again, and to do a little bit of explaining to people about what happens towards the end of the season and everything that's going on with everything that's introduced over the course of season 1.
Look at that, Mike. Finishing this first podcast in under 108 minutes with time to spare.
We finally did it.
Savor the flavor. Never going to happen again. All right, folks, we will be back next week with our first season conversation, talking about season 1 of Lost for first time viewers here on Down the Hatch. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.